Okay, good afternoon. I want to start by saying a few words about the arena situation and then pass over to Stephen Joyce and then we'll take your questions on that issue. Government agencies have been responding in a comprehensive way to the grounding of the arena on the Astrolabe Reef. There are several hundred people, including defence personnel, now involved. There have been media reports of oil washed up on local beaches. I'm advised that shoreline clean-up assessment teams have been responding to these reports. Public Health have been issuing messages to the public in response to the reports of oil, including not eating shellfish or touching anything with oil on it. The barge Awanui has been preparing this afternoon for transfer of more oil from the arena, weather permitting, after some oil was taken off last night. I emphasise that this is a very complex operation and may well take some time. International experts have been flown in and informed us that these sorts of accidents are extremely rare. So I'll just pass over to Stephen and then take any questions that you might like.
Thank you, Prime Minister. So as we're all aware, the arena grounded on the Astrolabe Reef, 6 miles north of Motiti Island, east of Tauranga, 2:20 a.m. last Wednesday. The ship's carrying about 1,360 20-foot equivalent units of container cargo, a mix of 20 and 40-foot containers. And it has, of course, the 1,700 tonnes of diesel oil on board. The forward half of the ship is hard aground with the stern afloat, and the hull has been breached in a number of places, from holes 4 forward, counting one to about 8 down the ship. Some oil is leaked from fuel lines and one fuel tank which is breached, and there is, at this stage, there doesn't seem to be any oil leaking from the ship at present, but that changes on an hourly and daily basis. There is also an oil sheen on the water around it. Maritime New Zealand is responsible for both maritime safety and pollution interventions. Its role involves search and rescue coordination, overview of salvage operations and oil spill response. So we deal with the salvage operation firstly. The salvage is an extremely difficult and challenging job that will not be resolved quickly. Under the powers the Director has, she has declared the arena a hazardous ship, requiring the owner to provide in advance all information on actions to salvage the ship. She has a salvage advisory team alongside the salvage team from the Spitzer Salvage from the Netherlands, who the owner has appointed to undertake the salvage operation. They are working through a number of things at the moment, in particular and most urgently the recovery of oil from the ship. And that's everybody's first focus. There are three things being done to address the oil on the ship at the moment. Firstly, they've provided caps over all the oil tanks. So if something happens to the ship, they can seal those tanks in time for the ship, for example, to break up, to minimise the chances of further oil going into the water. The second thing they're doing is moving oil from the front tanks, which are the most vulnerable ones, because that's where the ship is aground, to the aft end of the ship. They've succeeded in doing that with the port tanks. They are currently working on the starboard tanks. There are some issues around vapours, which they are seeking to clear at the moment. They're not going to cause any other trouble with the ship, but it makes it very difficult for the workers to work, and they have to do that before they can complete the transfer. And then the third, and the one that everybody wants to see instantaneously, of course, is the removal of the oil from the ship. That's very challenging. The weather conditions obviously make that quite difficult. The Awanui is the barge that has been alongside. They started shipping oil last night. They had to call that off around 10 p.m. They've been working to hook it up at various times through the day. And this is one of those things which is going to continue to occur. 1 minute I'll say they'll hook it up, in the next half hour or so they'll have to move away again. They are working on providing a stable platform for that transfer, but it's very dependent on weather. And obviously the safety of both ships and the crews are very important in achieving that outcome. If and when they get the clear weather that they need to be able to do this job, it will take between around 30 and 40 hours in total to transfer the oil from the ship into the bunkers on the barge. But they do need appropriate weather conditions to do that. In terms of the oil pollution response, that is underway. There's a huge range of equipment available and more coming. The reality is, though, that there, as we now know today, we've been saying for some days that there will be oil on the beaches, and the first oil has come ashore at Mount Maunganui Beach, I understand, this afternoon. Now that's what's known as, in quotes, old oil, which is oil from the last couple of days. But we are expecting more oil to come onto the beach over the next few days. Now it's very important, as per the public health advisories, that people do not touch that oil, that they keep their children and their pets away from that oil, and it is not advisable for them to go and pick it up themselves. Now, in terms of the response to that on the beaches, it's not at all efficient and effective to have a whole range of people running up and down from pump to pump of oil on the beach, trying to pick them all up as they arrive. What they'll be doing is waiting for high tide in each situation and then doing one clean-up. But again, as you can imagine, oil will continue to come on up the beach, and so it'll be progressive and it'll be a matter of days and weeks as they remove oil from the beach. So there's a range of other things that you may want to address. The key things are the oil response and the salvage of oil. Those are the things that everybody's very much focused on. Of course, the investigations are continuing as well, but happy to take any questions.
What's in the containers and the indigenous material and the ship cargo?
There are 11 containers that hold cargo which is classified by the EPA as dangerous goods. There are 2 containers that potentially give off flammable gases if they are in contact with water. The other 9 are considerably more, if you like, benign, but they are different levels of the hazard classification. They have the salvors have been monitoring the state of those containers on the ship, and they're all okay at this time. In other words, they're pure. The water is one that's actually involved. It's got water around it, but it is secure.
What do you think about a statement from the Maritime Union that the ship was checked down south from the 28th of September and problems were found with its charts? Can you give me advice?
I've had very recently advice that there was a follow-up check in relation to an Australian check. So there was Maritime New Zealand conducted a follow-up check in Bluff just a short time ago. In the last few weeks. Haven't got any more detail than that at this point, and that'll all be dealt with through the investigation phase and needs to be dealt with properly in terms of the history of the ship, what was happening on that night, and why in relatively calm seas that the ship ended up on that route.
What can you tell us about a possible near collision before this event with the oil tanker that left the lead?
No, I'm not aware of that at all. No.
Have you seen the reports in the State magazine about is it not true?
As I say, there's a whole range of things being addressed by the investigation, but that has not been briefed.
Have you asked the Maritime New Zealand about that?
I have asked them, obviously, to supply all history as part of the investigations, but let's be clear, the focus really is on, at this point in time, on the salvage of the oil and on the oil recovery cleanup. The investigations continue, both by TAPE and Maritime New Zealand. Certainly my focus is on those other aspects at this stage, and they are continuing with their investigations, and all that information will become available.
But is it not true, or is it just that you don't know because you haven't been informed?
I haven't been briefed on any near collisions.
What about sites, wetlands and that little Waihi Island and that sort of thing?
Yep.
What about protection for those areas that are vulnerable?
Well, there's 4 ways you can deal with oil spills in the sea, and the way you deal with them is according to the weather conditions and the situation around them at the time. So there's the dispersant you can use, which was used on Friday and Saturday, as we know, from helicopter and boat. That is itself toxic, so you want to use that carefully and make sure you actually get the oil. You also want to make sure that that's effective. There has been conflicting reports on the level of effectiveness of that, but that can be used in certain weather conditions, particularly when booming cannot be used. In the situation with booming, you can do on the ocean booming, but that requires very calm conditions. And you can also do booming close to the shore. The challenge with booming close to shore is that it's not suitable, as I understand it, when you've got a situation with a surf beach, which we have along much of the coast here, just isn't effective. and also in estuarine situations, because you have very high tidal flows in and out of harbours and rivers. And of course, they defeat the purpose of the booms.
So apart from the use of the dispersant, they're effectively unprotected.
Once you get that, as I'm advised, once you get that far, that close to those estuarine situations, you're not going to be able to keep it out of the estuaries. It's all going to be about the clean-up of the shore. And even in, as I was advised yesterday, even in a successful ocean safe-based clean-up, generally the most that people pick up actually out at sea is around 10% of the total. The rest of it either disperses naturally or ends up on the beach or on the coast.
How much concern is that about the contents of those containers, the 13, so basically being described as hazardous? What have you been advised would happen or would be the environmental or any other effect if they were to break open or come off or anything to do?
As I understand it, most of them are, as I say, reasonably benign. Some, for example, contain hydrogen peroxide, which if it's exposed to air, disperses very quickly and doesn't cause a long and significant environmental impact. There are 2 or 3 they are concerned about, and they keep close watch on all 11, and that's because of their potential to become inflammable if exposed. Don't forget, these are all in containers that have been sent to sea, so they are all sealed as part of their travel on the sea, but they are watching them very closely on the ship.
Why can't they be taken off? Is that partly because they are so unstable, that they're potentially flammable?
Well, the whole issue with containers on the ship, we do need to understand that the ship is on an 11-degree list. Both the Prime Minister and I were out there yesterday and I was there on Friday, which means it is one heck of a lean, particularly if you get up close to it. So it's not a case of just saying, okay, we'll go on and put that one up and we'll push that one over there and we'll pop that one out and take it out. It's just not that simple. So what's required is they have to bring the ship alongside and they have to steadily remove the containers while they're on a lean. And they have to be careful, obviously, they don't drop them on the ship that's trying to successfully remove the containers. And they're doing that in a situation where the sea is moving and both vessels are moving. It's a very challenging thing to be doing. On top of that, the absolute focus is removing oil. The oil is the biggest environmental impact. It's bigger than any of these containers, I understand. So the first focus has to be the oil, and the subsequent focus is the containers. And that's why they're approaching it in that way, because that's the greater environmental risk.
If 2 of these containers blow up, then oil is going to go everywhere.
Well, as I say, the job they have to do, first I'm not sure that it's not advised it's that unstable, but the reality is they have to get the oil sorted first in either situation, and that involves, as I say, getting the oil into a situation where it is sealed and or preferably on the ship.
What's your understanding on how much oil has leaked so far? How much is in the water?
There's of the oil on the ship, there's about 100 tonnes that is unaccounted for. In other words, they will take measurements in the tanks and be fairly accurate of what's in the tanks. About 100 tonnes is either out of the fuel lines or out of that number 3 starboard tank. Now, whether the bit that people don't know, nobody knows, is how much has actually left the ship. Their understanding is that from the tank rupture, that's gone down to what they call the keel, the base of the ship. The 100 tonnes has gone through. Some of that has subsequently gone out into the ocean. I've heard estimates in the last 3 days ranging between 10 tonnes and 50 tonnes actually in the ocean currently, and the balance will still be in the keel of the ship, which of course they have no access to either to measure or mop up. So that's the 100 tonnes that is unaccounted for.
So your best estimate is up to 50 tonnes is in the water at the moment?
Anything between 10 and 50 tonnes.
What's been done to contain that oil that's already
Sorry.
what's been done to contain that oil that's already in the ocean? That 10 to 50 tonnes?
Well, there's been a range of things, as I said. Firstly, there's been the dispersant, which attempts to get the oil down into beneath the surface and down into the water column where it dissipates over time. There has been the booming, but it's only been possible to do booming on 1 day so far, which was yesterday. And then the only other option is effectively shore mop-up, and we will have shore mop-up.
Are you satisfied that those things have been taken early enough to be able to stop the spread of the oil? Do you think that it washing up on the sea could have been prevented?
No, the advice I've had is there's no such thing as preventing it from coming ashore. That's the perfect world that doesn't exist.
The government
Why
has
is it
been
washed up
criticised for
already?
not being quick enough to act. Could you have acted sooner?
Well, I've sought advice on that, Barry, from the international salvage experts that have come here, including a salvage advisor for Maritime New Zealand, a guy called Jonathan Walker from Singapore. He says that this has been one of the fastest responses he's seen in terms of dealing with an issue such as this, which he describes as incredibly complex. I've also sought advice from the advisor we have from AMSTA in Australia. I spoke to Toby Stone yesterday. He advises me this is as fast as any he's seen, and he was involved in both the Queensland and the oil well one they had over there. So there's just nobody who's able to advise me that that's not the case. I understand the frustration, particularly the local people feel. We all wish that this hadn't happened. That would be the first preference for everybody, and everybody wants things to happen instantaneously. But what happens when something like this occurs is they send the experts in to review the situation, to work out where things are at, what the state of the ship is. They sent divers down on Friday. They had people here on Friday. They've got a set of naval architects in Holland poring over all the plans of the ship. They've been working out how to get access to the various tanks. All that has to happen while the craft and support vessels are assembled. And that's the way these things are done. And as I say, we'd all like to wave our magic wands and fix it, but that isn't the way it works.
What's the worst case scenario?
Well, the worst case scenario is obviously a lot of oil on the beaches. And the way to minimise that is to recover as much oil as possible, as soon as possible, failing that, to secure as much oil as possible within the ship should something happen to it. And in all time seek to minimise the amount of oil that comes ashore. But as we've been clear all the way along, there is going to be oil ashore, and we've started to see that today. There's no way that you can stop that. The only way you could have stopped that would have been if that ship had not hit that reef.
But presumably also from what you're saying, there's a danger if you get really bad weather that the ship breaks up and those containers also break loose?
Well, that's possibly one piece of cautious good news, and I say only cautious good news because there's no absolutes in this stuff. Certainly the salvage people are happier in the way the ship has held together over the last couple of days than they expected to be. There is no signs yet of it stressing in such a way that would cause a breakup to occur, and they will get some warning of that happening. Having said that, the weather, as we're experiencing out there, won't be helping, but that's probably a slightly unexpected upside at this point, as the ship seems to be holding together quite well.
What explanation has the captain given as to why he hit the reef?
Well, he's obviously been interviewed by the investigators. I haven't sought a briefing from the investigators. They have a job to do, and that will obviously be released in due course. The Transport Accident Investigation Commission will do what they call a interim fact-based report at some point in the next month or so, which will release just simply the information that they have, and that'll be the time when we get the opportunity to start forming views as to why something like this, which seems pretty inexplicable, has occurred.
What's in those? Oh, sorry. What's in those 2 to 3 most dangerous of the containers? What are they contain?
I can give you the chemical compound afterwards, Paddy. I don't have it with me, but there's a reasonably long chemical name and standard hazard chart and they're notified and by EPA.
Are they being kept at,
The captain been drinking? I truly don't know.
are those containers being kept at an optimum temperature? I mean-
Those containers are kept at the normal temperature. The normal temperature they are when they're at sea, because they are still at sea.
And they still have power to regulate the temperature of the containers?
I'm not sure whether that's required, Audrey, but I do know that the containers are being monitored. They've identified where they all are on the ship, and they have advised that there's only one that is not in a position that would normally be. In other words, there's water around it, and they didn't have any concerns about it at this time.
Have you received any more advice about the liability cover of the ship's owners, particularly for clean-up costs? In states, there's no advice that they will cover that.
So Maritime New Zealand has released some information today on that, which is available in the public domain, and that's ongoing. But again, my focus very much from this point is on the salvage and recovery. I haven't got that information.
Can you sketch out what is in those containers? I mean, is it mostly household goods or is it machinery or what?
It's a range of standard goods that you would expect, and a significant number of them are empties actually being transferred.
In terms of these, if you didn't know whether the captain had been drinking, is that subject to the investigation?
I think we can safely assume that, Tracy, yes.
At what stage would the torch be pulled in, and is there a role that the Navy can play?
Sorry, the Navy?
Yes, the Navy
They're there
doing
now.
something particular?
The
Right.
Navy, John Campbell, is the commander of Defence Force Operations. They have 4 or 5 ships present on site at the moment, including the HMS Endeavour, which is the command and control platform, 2 of the inshore protection vessels, the Navy dive tender, all of those are present. They have a number of naval staff and Air Force staff running the air operations and maritime operations around the ship on behalf of Maritime New Zealand, and they have several hundred Army personnel on standby to assist us.
Minister, have you been advised on the costs of this exercise so far, and who's going to bear those costs?
No, I have not been advised on those costs. Obviously, both insurance and the liability of the owners in relation to the Maritime Act will cover that first. But again, very much the focus at this point is on doing the job. We won't be stopping because we've reached a certain cash limit. The Prime Minister has assured me that we'll make sure that this is underwritten to ensure that it is.
What have the sailors told you?
I'm not sure the nationality captain. Most of the crew is Philippines.
As things go at the moment, have you had any advice about how much of the coast might end up falling on it?
Look, none of this is an exact science. The best estimates they had was that the oil would first get to Papamoa, and as you know, it's got to Mount Maunganui Beach. What happens is the oil plumes move around out in the ocean and they're subject to the currents and to the wind. So what will have happened is that the oil that we saw near the ship yesterday, which was moving to the north of the ship, some of it has obviously come ashore at Mount Maunganui Beach. The best estimate, according to all the modelling that they do, is that the bulk of it would be in Papamoa.
So what have the sailors told you in terms of the prospects of getting the containers off and getting the Rena off the reef in one piece?
I think they have put all the usual caveats around it that you would expect. They have told me that this is a very, very challenging operation. The Maritime Advisor from Singapore, Mr. Walker, says that this is probably one of, if not the most complicated that he's seen in the 15 years that he's been doing this stuff. You only get 3 of these sorts of things happening a year, and the general consensus is this is one of the most difficult ones. Because the ship is rammed so hard on the reef, it was obviously travelling at good speed when it hit the reef, and that is makes it pretty challenging. But I think these guys, they've got a job to do. They have a plan to remove the oil, they have a plan to move the containers, and they have a plan to refloat the ship. But that will be dependent to a lot of degrees on factors outside of their control, including the weather.
Okay,